Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome. I'm just saying my welcomes while Dr. Dupree lets people into the room. Thank you for taking the time to be here. We're going to record this, so I suppose you should know that it's going to go into the archive and go online as well. So just be aware of that. All right, well, I think let's get going for now because I see that it's already 1 minute past 3. My name is Nomalanga Mkhize. I'm in the Department of History and Political Studies at Mandela University. And I am also the acting director of school for the School of Governmental and Social Sciences, which houses a number of disciplines. And also the Center for Philosophy in Africa, which is one of the organizing partners for these seminar series. The seminar series is also co-hosted with the Emengini Institute in Massachusetts. So welcome to any guests, either those who are with us now or who will view this talk down the line. So welcome to everyone. I'm going to be the moderator for this. And so you won't be seeing me in my usual participative, usually in the way that I participate in seminars, because I have to behave in this one. So welcome to everyone. I would like to just tender an apology for the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Engagement and Transformation, Professor Andre Kiet, who is the driving force and architect behind our big transformation projects in this university, especially our curriculum transformation project. He could not make it, and he, not because he didn't want to, but he just really got constrained with the bottleneck of commitments that he faces as the Deputy Vice Chancellor. So he will be viewing this from the comfort of his room, I'm sure, when the video is available. But he really wanted to say, you know that Andre would love to be here with us, and he would have been here if he could. So with that, I would like, however, to welcome everybody and to call on the Dean of Humanities, Professor Pamela Masego, just to say a word of welcome for everyone.
Thank you, Professor Mkhize. Yeah, it's simple today, what I must do. Just to really say welcome to everybody, particularly Professor Eze. I think we are at a point in our university where we need, as a faculty, to look critically at what has been articulated through the vision of the university as pivotal up to year 2030. The Vice Chancellor is the, should I say, carries the flagship towards the revitalization of the humanities. And as a faculty, we are the academic hosts of, I always say we are the academic hosts of the university's vision. And so at a point, Prof. Eze, where we are looking critically at questions around the significance of the humanities in the academy, and just to reinvigorate, give life to humanities at this point. And so in that process of revitalization, questions of whose knowledge counts become important, and questions about the marginalization of knowledge emanating from Africa becomes important. So I need to acknowledge Professor Uchenna Okeja and Professor Nomalanga Mkhize for always identifying pivotal scholars from Africa who must engage us about these critical questions. And what Nomalanga said towards the end is quite important, that we are not just identifying scholars who are just going to talk to us and we forget about these things towards the end. we need, when you leave today after an hour or so, Prof. Eze, we need to talk about what do these means? What do these things mean in our curriculum? How do we integrate them to transform the curriculum in the university? So, Professor, welcome. And what I said in a previous webinar is that we want sustained relationships through these contacts. So it's not just for today that we're inviting you, and we're not evaluating you through your presentation here. We know your work, we know the value of your work, but I hope you're able to gauge our seriousness about your scholarship and how we want it to influence how we view scholarship in the academy. So with those few words, thank you very much. And again, I wanted to also apologize for Professor Kit. He's been a great collaborator in this process. So thank you very much, colleagues. Welcome. Nomalanga, we're gonna miss your engagement here because you always instill that sense of us wanting to talk. You always ask critical questions. So please do post something to poke us, to get us to speak. So just with those words, thank you, colleagues, and welcome. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Maseko, and we really are grateful for your leadership as you've taken the helm of the faculty. And as I said to Professor Eze, we are carrying a great name here at this university. We take it very seriously. So we are building a really properly rooted sense of what it means to be an African intellectual. I'd like with that to welcome Professor Uchenna Ukeja to just do some few words of welcome as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Professor Mkize, and thanks colleagues and friends for taking the time to participate in this event today. We really appreciate your time. The idea of this seminar series is very simple. It is the outcome of our attempt to really think about where we find ourselves today in the African continent, where the African child, the African descendant person is standing today, regardless of geographical location. One thing is clear, and that is that there is still a sense in which we can say that Africans and African descendant persons all over the world seem to be standing in one place, in a place they have been standing for perhaps 400 years. So the question is, why this inertia? Why this permanence of inability to imagine a different trajectory? So when we complain that certain things are not the way they should be, that is just one part of the story. The other aspect of the story is to imagine what needs to be done in the here and now to bring about a future that we all can be proud of, we all can participate in, and find some sense of meaning in our lives. So it is, trying to perhaps respond to what Ali Masri and a number of other scholars have attempted to do in the 1960s and 70s, when there was the discussion around the nature of the African university, for instance, as a multinational corporation. What do we need to do today to give meaning to the life of the human person in Africa? This is a core concern that led to this seminar series, and we are very grateful to our speaker today, Professor Eze, for accepting our invitation to speak. We look forward to engaging with you and also having this dialogue and conversation with everyone present today. So thank you very much. Thanks again to my colleagues in the organizing team and to the Dean, Professor Maseko. for taking the time to join us today. So thank you very much, and back to you, Professor Mkize.
Thanks very much. And with that, I would like to just introduce our speaker. The theme of his talk is Nelson Mandela and the Topology of African Encounter with the World. Professor Eze is a professor of African and African American Literary and Cultural Studies at Northeastern Illinois University, Chicago, where he's also a Bernard J. Brommel Distinguished Research Professor. He earned his BA in philosophy at St. Joseph's Seminary, Nigeria, he has several other qualifications from several distinguished universities. You will see in his bio that was sent through with the invite. He has written extensively on such topics as cosmopolitanism, empathy, human rights, social justice. He is the author of Race, Decolonization, and Global Citizenship in South Africa, Ethics and Human Rights in Anglophone African Women's Literature, and several other publications. And he's currently working on a book titled The Wisdom of Mandela, Anger, Forgiveness, and Friendship in African Political Thought. I really love the concept of friendship in African political thought. So we hope that we have a great friendship with you. You now have 40 minutes to engage with us. Siyabonga.
All right. Thank you very much for this wonderful introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this great project, Africa and Knowledge Seminar Series. It's a great honor to be associated with Nelson Mandela. I love him. I love what he stands for in the African moral landscape. So what I'm going to present to you today is part of an ongoing book project, which has already been mentioned. I began to think about this book in 2016, while I was a fellow at the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Studies. I witnessed the students' uprising at the time, otherwise known as Fallism or the Fallist movement. I was surprised that some youths called Mandela a sellout. Popular painter Ayanda Mabulu even called him Hitler. I understand their pain. I understand the pain of the born-free generation. I understand their anger. You cannot know the degree of injustice and violence in the South African history without being angry. But I don't understand their calling Mandela a sellout. Well, perhaps the reason is that they don't understand the value of Nelson Mandela. And I guess one of the reasons they don't understand Mandela is that we intellectuals have not yet explained the moral and political significance of Mandela. So this is why I decided to work on the already mentioned book. I am, of course, not presenting Mandela as a saint. He is not. My goal today is to examine him as a kind of new theory, a way of understanding Africa's encounter with herself and with the world. So I see him as a metaphor. To begin, I ask myself a few questions, which include, what exactly distinguishes Mandela from other leaders in Africa? For example, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, Paul Biya of Cameroon, Jacob Zuma of South Africa, and many others. Another question is, what can Mandela teach us about what to value and how to value it? One last question, what can Mandela teach us about how to live together in a world of increasing diversity? So Nelson Mandela is universally revered as one of the most important world leaders of the last 6 decades. He is admired as an icon of peace and interracial understanding. We recall, though, that he had been called a terrorist when he was fighting for the liberation of his people. He was, of course, as we know, one of the founders of Umkhonto we Sizwe, MK, the military arm of the ANC. But he became a different person after 27 years in prison. So one might ask, what happened? Did the prison teach him something? We don't know. But did he really become a different person? I argue that he did not become a different man. The issue is that he has always been a very intelligent man who understood how to adapt to a changed world. He understood that new challenges demanded new approaches. And some of these new challenges cannot be met with violence. So in the remainder of the time given me, I'm going to discuss two anecdotes associated with Nelson Mandela. And I'm going to discuss two scenes from Things Fall Apart. And the reason I'm discussing Things Fall Apart is to lay out the structure of the human encounter in Africa and its representations in post-colonial discourses. I'll conclude then by returning to what I call Mandela's moral and political imperative. The first anecdote, and I'll read. Mandela's most favorite of Aesop's fables has it that one day, the sun and the wind had a debate on who was the stronger. While they are disputing, a traveler passes by the road, wrapped in a cloak. The sun says, "Let us agree that he is the stronger who can strip that traveler of his cloak." The wind takes up the challenge and right away blasts a cold gust against the traveler. Right then, the traveler wraps his cloak tightly around himself. The harder the wind blows, the tighter he holds the cloak to him. The wind grows angrier and blows with greater force, but all its efforts is in vain. It gives up. It's now the turn of the sun. It begins to shine. At first, its rays are gentle. The traveler is happy. He unties his cloak and lets it hang loosely from his shoulders. As the sun's rays grow warmer and warmer, the man takes off his cap. He finally pulls off his cloak and throws himself down in the welcome shade of a tree by the side of the road. So this is Nelson Mandela's favorite fable. The second anecdote. So when Mandela was released from jail, he went to the Cape Town parade. He shook hands with many people, including F.W. de Klerk, and addressed a large crowd, calling all South Africans to work for peace and reconciliation. It was one of the many handshakes that went around the world and reassured the nervous nation that the future held better promises. He was called a man of many handshakes. So with the handshake, he set the tone for reconciliation and its legendary notion of forgiveness. He forgave his jailers and consequently appealed to his fellow South Africans to forge a common community by responding to the pain of others. So we might ask ourselves, what exactly is forgiveness? What is reconciliation? Why does Mandela love this particular fable by Aesop? So the centrality of above Aesop's fable in Mandela's thinking can best be appreciated in the context of the long history of anti-colonial struggle in Africa. So we might ask, what have we achieved? Mandela knew Frantz Fanon's revolutionary thoughts. When he formed MK, he subscribed to violence as a means of liberating his people, and he owed no one apologies for that. So he knew violence. He knew the uses of violence. The post-apartheid period, however, brought a new set of questions, none of which can be met with violence. The most central of these questions include, how do we form a society that is superior to the one we have overthrown? How do we bring about human well-being in the country? Mandela asks through Aesop, how do we coax goodwill and cooperation from all South Africans so as to rebuild a nation torn apart by hatred and racial violence? How do we make South Africa a place of human flourishing? This thinking required that Mandela abandon ideology. And as Martha Nussbaum has observed, it requires that Mandela exercise practical wisdom. Mandela, she argues, has demonstrated that the most important task in dealing with the other party is, to quote, to work with you rather than against you. Progress is impeded by the other party's defensiveness and anxious self-promotion. Hence, the wisdom of the sun is getting the traveler to do the sun's will without the traveler knowing it. And even if he knew, he still complied because doing so was in his self-interest. That's what I regard, that's what I call intelligence. The history of decolonization shows that the confrontational and oppositional model of identity and nation building adopted by the likes of Robert Mugabe and others have had its merits. We cannot dismiss it. But all things considered, it has failed to enhance the lives of ordinary people. One could actually say the age of African solutions for African problems is gone. It's impossible to solve Africa's problems with African solutions. Aware of the heavy duty of nation building in South Africa, in a society of diverse races and ethnicities, Mandela chose not to define these races and ethnicities and the individuals who identify with them. Rather, he adopted a cosmopolitan attitude. He chose to relate to them, to encounter them. And the most obvious symbol, the most obvious trope of this readiness to relate is the handshake, a gesture that acknowledges the other body and all ethical obligations it assumes. As philosopher Richard Kearney has argued in his exploration of what he called carnal hermeneutics, the first act of civilization was a handshake, which was already an act of hospitality by putting out an open hand rather than reaching for the sword. It is the fundamental task of choosing either hostility or hospitality. Kearney's insight into the phenomenology of handshake captures, for me, the essence of Mandela's philosophy. In showing an open palm rather than a clenched fist, in reaching out to shake the other, Mandela demonstrated that he was not holding anything back in terms of human relations. He was not clutching a stone. We must, however, acknowledge that his gesture entailed some degree of risks. Indeed, a handshake, an open palm, meets another open palm in a demonstration of vulnerability. In shaking people's hands, as we now know, thanks to the coronavirus, one can contract a disease. But I think the reward is worth the risk. Mandela's hand reaching out to shake others, especially the clerks, states strongly, I recognize you, I affirm you. Interpreted against the backdrop of Euro-modernist philosophy, or if you like, the apartheid philosophy, the ideology that conceived the Black body as an absence, that is to say, as subhuman, and therefore unworthy of being related to. Mandela establishes a new modality of encounter in the world, not just in South Africa. It is one rooted in an unconditional affirmation of the humanity of the other. This, I think, is the foundational premise of reconciliation. It's the South Africa's greatest gift to the world, and which has not yet received its due attention. This greatest gift, I think, is in, as others have already said, in upending the European or the Euro-modernist conception of the world. Mandela's handshake, one has to observe, one has to note, is also a clever socio-political move, understood as an open invitation for cooperation. It's no secret that whites, South Africans, and others possess the technological and even political know-how that the post-apartheid society cannot do without. Mandela understood that the ANC and Black people have been in opposition for as long as South Africa existed. And there will need enough white people and enough people of Asian descent and others of good faith to help keep the country up to par with the technologically and democratically more developed parts of the world. A condition that will be forfeited were Black people to pursue retribution and vengeance. Of course, one could say the TRC has its weakness. It has been criticized for not pursuing justice in the typical Western retributive format. I accept that it was not perfect. But despite its weaknesses, the ritual of the TRC, which could be seen as an extension of Mandela's personality and political masterstroke, marked the formal end of the oppositional conception of identity and reality. It posed the challenge of constructing universal moral frameworks for conviviality. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting or doing away with the past, no. Nor does it mean leaving intact the economic status quo that has kept a majority of the Black population in poverty. It does not mean not addressing the legacies of the evils of the past. Forgiveness suggests not allowing the past to be the measuring scale of today's encounter with the world. It means encountering humans from the standpoint that takes their dignity as a given, and proceeding from there to consider conditions that can enhance the lives of everyone. This includes a rigorous pursuit of justice and fairness. Forgiveness, therefore, dispenses with cheap moral judgments deriving from the past in which one is cast as a victim, an implicit psychic resort that has sustained post-colonial African discourse. Forgiveness is seeking to create conditions for political friendship. Mandela understood that friendship is a key. Is a key that one can use to unlock frozen hearts. For example, his prison guard, Christo Brand, who was an 18-year-old man when he was sent to Robben Island in 1978 to guard Mandela, gives an account that contains some insight in relation to Mandela's philosophy of friendship and its potential political implications. Brand had been instructed that he was going to guard the most dangerous terrorists. But when he met Mandela, he was surprised by Mandela's friendliness. Mr. Brand came to his job with his mind already poisoned by the typical ideological narrative of the powerful, which is to demonize the powerless. Mandela diffused that narrative by taking interest in Mr. Brand's humanity. He asked Brand about his personal life, his family, what his plans for the future was. He eventually won him over with his friendship, just like the sun. The prison guard responded in kind. He began to protect Mandela. He accorded Mandela preferential treatment, not because of Mandela's royal heritage, but because of Mandela's humanity. He undertook to preserve Mandela's life rather than treat him as a criminal, an enemy of the state. Mr. Brand could have decided to make Mandela's life extremely difficult. Friendship has advantages, the most obvious of which is that it not only preserves life, it makes it easier to live. Friendship makes life easy, is economically cheap. Friendship or true encounter makes it easy for humans to put themselves in the shoes of others. Friendship necessarily expands our hermeneutic horizon, if only for the simple reason that it disposes one to engage with the world of others rather than dismiss it offhandedly. Encounter allows humans to hear one another's stories, and the more stories we hear, the more our imagination expands and makes space for others in our lives. Expanding one's hermeneutic horizon, expanding one's moral imagination through encounter with others and hearing their stories often keeps one morally alert. For one, it reminds individuals that in the same way that meaning is not generated by an individual all alone, so does one arrive at the awareness that one cannot live meaningfully without respect for the dignity and comfort of others. Understood within this context, encounter suggests a compelling moral framework by the force of which all individuals who take themselves seriously bind themselves to the survival and flourishing of the community. The individual understands morality as a bounden duty. Slide. It understands morality as a bounden duty, as Harry Frankfurt states. Morality in this regard is essentially designed to put people on the hook. Whether or not a person adheres to the moral law is not supposed to be independent of the kind of person he or she is. We put ourselves on the hook, not because we choose to make our lives unbearable, but because our survival as humans depends on every one of us overcoming ourselves so that we can work together for the benefit of all. Seen through this prism, seen through this perspective of Mandela's philosophy of encounter and friendship, to extend the hand of friendship is to put oneself on the hook. It is simply a testament to the fact that one compels oneself to live within a given framework that takes the humanity of other people as starting point of anything. For example, if you have the right to demand respect from others, then you must also show respect to others. I think that's the simple law of living in a community that we want to survive. I now discuss two scenes from Things Fall Apart. And as I said earlier, the goal is to establish the failures of post-colonial discourse to address some of the, one could say, some of the feudal elements in African culture. Things Fall Apart is one of the most influential post-colonial African novels. Okonkwo is a respected leader in Umuofia. So when British colonialists and missionaries invade his people, he champions a strong resistance against the invaders. He eventually commits suicide when he realizes that his clan, his people, is not willing to join his crusade against the colonial invaders. His death is ultimately thought to have conferred on him the honor of tragic heroism and is a signifier of African anti-colonial resistance. The novel gave Africa its most eloquent, unifying narrative that anchored post-colonial African culture and identity in resistance to the West. Owing to the need, because of the need to address the colonial oppressors, not much attention has been paid, to the contours of human encounter in Africa, especially as structured in the novel. Fundamental questions such as those that analyze the moral quality of human interactions are largely ignored. We fail to ask questions that examine the conditions of justice. And when these questions are addressed, the answers are packaged in a collective ethnic choral response that yield no knowledge, such as the Igbo notion of whatever, the Zulu concept of, the African conception of. Most responses to the novel express glowing admiration of its role in redeeming and shaping African culture, and I agree with it. My interest is in examining the image of the human as portrayed in the many significant scenes, such as the fate of the members of the Osu caste, or the so-called untouchables, who are considered by the Igbo to be inferior humans. We recall, in particular, the depressing scene of the killing of Ikemefuna, the boy originally from Mbano, who was taken as a ransom for the fact that his people killed a woman from Umuofia. He was raised in Okonkwo's household. The Umuofia oracle dictates that the boy be sacrificed. And without challenging the oracle, Okonkwo leads the boy to the jungle where he kills him. So the question, what exactly was Ikemefuna's life to Umuofia people in general and to Okonkwo in particular? Slide. In his discussion of justice and otherness in Africa, Nigerian philosopher Uchenna Okeja argues that the primary condition of justice in society is the unconditional acceptance of the humanity of the other. Justice is based on deliberation, which in itself is contingent upon the intersubjective affirmation of a basic principle, namely the principle of humanity. Unless you accept that I'm human, you are not going to treat me humanly. Recognition is the basis for justice, without which no society can function in a somewhat acceptable civil manner. Recognition from our fellow humans is essential primarily for our self-perception as humans and secondarily for our exercise of citizenship. Even when we are aware that we possess dignity as humans, we still need our fellow to affirm it in their relation to us. We still need our fellow to extend a handshake. In Things Fall Apart, slide. In Things Fall Apart, an Osu is defined as a person dedicated to a god, a thing set apart, a taboo forever, and his children after him. He could neither marry nor be married by the freeborn. He was in fact an outcast. Wherever he went, he carried with him the mark of his forbidden caste. And Osu could not attend an assembly of the freeborn, and there in turn could not shelter under his roof. So the descendants of these Osu people dedicated to the deities inherit their ancestors' fate in the same way that the descendants of Black slaves, and indeed all Blacks in America, inherited the scourge of racism. And I think the closest analogy is the condition of Black people under apartheid. In Things Fall Apart, the Osu are featured. The Osus are featured mainly in relation to the advent of Christianity. So when they saw that the new religion welcomed twins and such abominations, they thought that it would be possible that they will also be received. They were thus among the first Igbo to convert to Christianity. The new religion gave to them what the old order denied them: a sense of worth, recognition as humans. The Osus were not the first people to welcome the white man and convert to Christianity. Okonkwo's son was also. Obierika is known as the wise man of the clan. He is the thinker. When he visits Okonkwo in his place of exile, he tells Okonkwo how Umuofia has changed during the 7 years of his absence. The white man has established missions, and the people of Umuofia have abandoned their old way of life. The saddest news is that Moye, as Okonkwo's first son, has joined the missionaries. Later in the discussion slide, Obierika observes that the white man has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart. Well, here it's not accidental that Obierika, the thinker, pronounces the judgment on the white man as the cause of their community disintegrating. A simple question: is he really telling the truth? I call him the archetypal, the quintessential post-colonial elite. Let us take a step back and ask some vital questions. Why was it rather too easy for the members of the Osu caste to join the new religion? So why could Okonkwo, who wanted to fight the colonial master, not prevent his own son from joining the white man's religion? Why was it easy for the society to collapse even without putting up a fight? I think attempts to answer these questions objectively must begin from the perspective of the outcasts, the underprivileged. Of course, we already know the official answer from the perspective of Obierika, the official answer of the elites of that society. So let us begin with Moye, the son of Okonkwo's son. The reason for his abandoning his father and everything he stood for was not only because he was attracted to the poetry of the new religion. The reason was that his disappointment in his father, because his father could not fail to protect Ikemefuna, a boy he had begun to see as a brother. Indeed, he saw in his father someone who could easily kill him. Okonkwo and the culture could not give Nwoye something to hold on to, something to love and defend, universal human values of love, justice, mercy, forgiveness, truth. These are what make us humans. The same could be said of the people of Umuofia about the Osus. In the same way that Okonkwo failed to protect the life of Ikemefuna, the elites of the people failed to establish conditions for the practice of justice, or conditions that will allow these people to perceive themselves as humans. So basically, the outcasts had nothing in common with the rest of society because there was no basis for justice and fairness. They were not recognized. For them, therefore, things did not fall apart because things never stood together in the first place. So strictly speaking, therefore, things fell apart only for the privileged members of society who lost the power to control the narratives in that society. Well, to be sure, I do not dismiss the structure of European imperial power. I do not dismiss the violence of the gunboats. We know the history of the Zulu and the Xhosa warriors who fought till the bitter end. But that is a different story. So Umuofia fell apart not only because of the colonialist military might, but precisely because there were cracks in society that prevented a certain degree of cohesion and a functioning moral framework. There were scant grounds for an enriching human encounter. So in many ways, we could take things fall apart as a cautionary tale for every society in which a section of the populace is denied recognition because of their difference to the normative group. This, I think, is a plausible interpretation and a line of serious intellectual inquiry. However, and sadly, this has not been the case. We are yet to engage in creative thoughts and questions that would enhance conditions for the practice of justice and fairness and fulfilling human encounter. And this is where Mandela comes in. Mandela offers us an opportunity for a fresh start. One could say there are two possibilities regarding Obiorika, symbolic of the post-colonial elite of his or the elite of his people. Either he is not being honest, or he had a very limited moral imagination. And I think Mandela presents a stark contrast. Mandela is objective and has an expanded moral imagination. Once again, I do not ignore the violence of the colonial encounter, but after Mandela, critical discourse in Africa can no longer crawl back to the cave of blind and abstract speculations. We must engage the human conditions and answer important questions such as, what are we to one another? How do I relate to the next person I see on the African continent? How do we relate to members of minorities, to people with alternative sexualities, to people who do not look like us? Do we reach out open palms or clenched fists? To conclude, I return to the Ikemefuna story. For a proper ethical and perhaps political reading of the scene, I propose what I call the Rawlsian test. Slide, please. proposed what I call the Rawlsian test for the judgment of the African condition. Indeed, the condition of every modern society. It's about John Rawls' thoughts experiment, a hypothetical condition called the original position or the veil of ignorance. I paraphrase here in particular regard to these two stories of the two stories of human sacrifice by oracles, if you consider the God of Abraham as an oracle. So Abraham's intended sacrifice of Isaac in the Bible and Okonkwo's killing of Ikemefuna. And also in regard to the Osu caste system. Imagine you were an embryo, unaware of which society you will be born in. You were asked to choose between an Isaac society and an Ikemefuna society. You will most likely wish to be born in a society that finds a way to save your life rather than vanquish it in the name of faithfulness to the oracle. Another version, which kind of society would you like to be born in if you did not know in which condition of health or ability or sexual orientation you will be born? The one that respects the dignity and difference of every individual, or one that regards difference as nuisance and anomalous? We would rather choose to be born in societies that not only have a place for people with disabilities, but also help them to live to their utmost capability. However, since we all are born in imperfect societies, and given that we might be privileged to be born without disability or not to belong to those excluded from power or those who do not belong to the normative group, the greater and nobler challenge for all of us is to ask how to create societies in which all lives can be appreciated and helped in their pursuit of happiness. The nobler task is to create a condition for the practice of justice. This, I think, is the most urgent challenge facing all of us, world elites. It's the challenge of asking Aesopian questions. What is the best way to enhance human flourishing in Africa? What kind of society do I want? And what is the best way to achieve it? How would I want to be treated if I were different? Mandela's undisguised efforts to learn from all sectors of South African society must be seen as a sign of political strength rather than of weakness. His generosity towards his former jailers and his refusal to condemn them is nothing short of moral and political ingenuity designed to put South Africa on the path of continuous and fruitful negotiations, or what my friend Uchenna would call deliberations, which is actually what democracy is all about. The Euro-modernist construction of the world, which we identify as the culprit of much of the world's problems today, was devoid of reflections, of self-reflections and humility. It was binary in its conception of the world. It lacked inclusivity. Mandela turned it upside down with his cosmopolitan moral compass, with his handshake. He therefore set the frames for a new encounter in the emergent democratic society and for the world. Encountering others in a mutually enriching ways might indeed be the only thing that saves the world in which all lives are now inescapably interconnected, physically and virtually. Slide. Recognizing how we all are mutually dependent on one another is a sign of strength and high intelligence. It's not weakness. our survival lies not just in our hands, but right on our open palms. For to be free, I conclude with this wonderful saying by Mandela. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Eze. Some provocative and complex things to think about there. Just when you spoke about Mandela's handshake, I think anyone literally who has ever shaken Mandela's hand can say something about the absolute energy and charisma of the person and the way in which his whole is tunzisake, like the way it draws you in. But then the Zulu, there's a Zulu idiom which says, which is, I give you my hand, but then you take the whole arm. And so the question is that what happened to Mandela? You know, he took his hand out and shook your hand, but they took his whole arm, which means taking the generosity of a person for granted. There are some questions here in the chat. I'd rather ask the people to either read them for themselves or just summarize properly in a question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, I think it says, it's a Michael Eze. Michael Eze, would you like to please unmute and just make your comment? I think I saw Didi and Kitty attending. Welcome. Okay, yeah, thanks. Can you put on your video? Does your video work?
Yeah, can you see me? I'm on my
yes, Jenny, you could kindly just remove the spotlight function so that, yeah, okay, there we go. Thanks.
Can you see me? Is that okay now?
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I was just asking, thank you, Chilo, for this program paper. I think I enjoyed it. I like the metaphor for friendship. Unfreezing the past, open a discursive narrative engagement, a kind of a contemporary space that moves beyond the binary way of looking at people, as I, of course, going back to Fanon, the Manichaean way of seeing people good or bad, evil or good, but transcending it. So that's very powerful. I like it. Thank you so much. I just say kind of more of a commentary here. Can you hear me?
I think, yeah, if you look directly towards your mic, we'll hear you better.
Okay.
That's much better.
Okay, yeah. So my question is, you mentioned when in history of Africa, I mean, we know the nature of the state in Africa has emerged under what condition we have today, the idea of external and internal sovereignty. You mentioned Mugabe, and as a historian, I'm wondering, before 2000, Mugabe, for example, was a darling in the Western imagination. He is loved by everybody in the West. But as soon as he began to talk about the land, he became a villain in the Western imagination. Now, Mandela is also celebrated, very much celebrated. But we already know as well that to what extent Mandela, that was anti-apartheid hero, is not the same weight as Mandela. After apartheid ended, reality set in. He recognized the fact that, first of all the things he promised during the anti-apartheid struggle, he couldn't do any of them. He had to negotiate. Negotiation, the sunset clause had to really, everything he wanted to do the sunset clause, they removed. So the only option for him was to negotiate. So all the things he promised during the anti-apartheid struggle, he couldn't do any of them. And so, of course, he remained a hero, okay? He still maintained that way. So I'm just wondering, had Mandela ruptured this kind of what I call it, the difference, of course, the de jure and de facto power. If he had ruptured the de facto power, trying to reclaim de facto power, I mean, he had authority, but the global power relations didn't allow him to do any of those things he promised during the anti-apartheid struggle. Had he tried to force his hand on those things, trying to reclaim the path for the people as he promised during the anti-apartheid struggle, do you think we will still be talking of him as a hero and a saint? So I just want you to put it in the respect of international politics, the reality of global politics, neoliberalism, and beyond the ideology we want to talk about as it is today. Thank you for this. I'm sorry for this rather long.
No, it's fine. Thanks. I see the hands. We know they say Mandela went to, I think, Davos in 90, whatever it was, and then came back and said, we're not doing nationalization anymore. So that's the question. You know, he went to Davos, came back and outwin nationalization. Okay, I'm going to go with this. Agogo, please. If I've pronounced that well, Agogo.
Well, that's fair. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Prof. Chielo. Very provocative and very interesting talk. Before I begin to express the areas where I disagree, let me say that—
Can I just ask you to keep your microphone like steady so we can hear you?
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, so let me begin quickly by thanking, I came midway, but I really find the exposition on the handshake very, very powerful and probably entirely agreeable. But I have questions about some of the examples and some of the allusions and what I may term what seems to be the overall framing, the apparent anti-post-colonial framing of the entire discourse is what I find a bit problematical. For instance, concluding that whatever approach Mugabe took has failed, I think it's extremely premature. And to conclude also that in spite of everything we appreciate and we regard and we extol Mandela for, to conclude again, to say Mandela is now successful in such a, if I would say, unequivocal way, I think is terribly premature because we live in circumstances that are still in flux. And I also find it a bit worrying for the speaker to say that post-colonial approaches to the African condition have been devoid of self-examination, because that's the top and bottom of some of the comments that he made. In reception of Things Fall Apart, for as long as I can remember, even as a child in school, we were aware that scholars, African post-colonial scholars, have indeed noted that the problems experienced in Umuofia, and by extension to a lot of Africa, were not they were not completely over-determined by the actions of the colonialists, as violent as those were. We recognize, I think Chinua Achebe made it very easy for any critical reader to recognize that there were cracks within the society. So to say that in so many decades of post-colonial argumentation that post-colonial scholars have not paid attention to this, I don't think is very correct. One very outstanding critical work, but let me not say very outstanding, but one critical work that's out there, Iwan Wangi, I'm sure that Prof. Chielo knows this fellow I'm talking about, wrote more than 10 years ago in analysis of the work that has been described as second generation and third generation African literature, how African writers have turned the gaze more internally to see the ways in which the African condition has been sometimes made worse, or where problems have not been helped by what detractors from inside. So I think that's not extremely correct. So I will end with this. If we are to diss completely the post-colonial reactions as insufficient, not that I'm arguing that they're entirely sufficient, but to dismiss them in the way I think this presentation has done, I think it's unfair because we cannot at this stage reach a conclusive and unequivocal conclusion on responses to these ongoing issues to say this response is a failed response or that other response is now a successful response. And there's the real danger that presentations of this nature, which represent African reactions to these conditions in ways that seem to be dismissive, there is a danger that these representations can be considered that they are pandering to dominant Western responses to Africa, because it's a very common refrain in the West. Oh, you cannot blame colonialism for everything. Oh, you cannot blame colonialism. This, in a way, begins to pander to that kind of narrative, and that's what I find a bit disturbing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to call Makokwana. I'm just going to let the questions come. There's one more after this, and then I will give you a chance, Professor. Makokwana.
Thank you so much, Chair, and also thank you so much, Professor Eze. I'm not going to switch on my video. Thank you, Jenny. I've got a few things to comment following on the previous speaker. I must say that when you started and mentioned that the generation, especially the young people in South Africa, kind of portrayed Mandela in this manner that was disturbing to you. It is something that we are kind of used to, you know, when we talk about that there has to be like sort of his dignity in a way is compromised. But my understanding is that Mandela, but these particular group of young people in this continent at this particular point in time, they see Mandela as part of a particular system and epoch, rather than to individualize Mandela as the person who then, in a way, extends a hand that has material condition, consequences for the younger generation. So I would not say, I think it will be too easy to reduce the kind of pessimism that has engulfed the youth around this particular moment, the handshake moment. And also, especially when there is no particular recognition and respect of the other in the process of the handshake. I think Mandela was part of a long lineage of many different leaders within the continent who have extended a hand before the colonialism or before the resistance itself. So there was an extended hand before. And I think it is grossly unfair to kind of freeze the moment and the pessimism that comes with this moment, especially to the people who are currently enduring the material consequences of the handshake. Thank you so much.
Okay, our final comment question, Abiodun. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Prof, for the insightful presentation. And I quite agree with the starting point of your presentation that a lot of people out there, maybe particularly my own generation, and when I say my own generation, the young people out there do not really recognize what Mandela stands for and the kind of virtues that Mandela could have brought to South Africa and Africa and the world at large. But from your presentation, particularly your thoughts about friendship and how Mandela deployed friendship handshake to bring about peace, progress. I'm worried about the way you deployed that concept of friendship. Of course, it's very, very interesting, very insightful. But my question comes from the thought that the approach of friendship that Mandela uses, it couldn't have been a stand-alone virtue. Other things must have been in place before Mandela could deploy friendship as a way to bring about peace and progress and to bring about human flourishing. I looked at it side by side with Mahatma Gandhi of India, and of course, at least both of them, they used non-violence to approach the situation of their country. And what I'm very much aware about is the approach of friendship about that Mandela uses does not necessarily means that every other individual can approach issues, can approach the societal challenges in that manner. There has to be a human conditioning first from within before that approach can really work out. Then my second question is that when we look at the present day South Africa, or I mean the post-apartheid South Africa, it is always very clear that a lot of things still need to happen for the people to approach friendliness, friendship, extending handshake, just like Mandela has deployed. And perhaps it might not be too difficult to realize why it's still very difficult to see that cooperation, that friendship being extended in post-apartheid. And maybe from the kind of people that I have had discussion with, they always lay claim to the fact that the shadow of apartheid is still very much around, and all of those things still has to be in place. So my worry is, even if they insist on taking upon friendship, just like Mandela has deployed, and just like you have rightly presented to us, does it not include, or does it not mean that the others, I mean, those whom they want to come in friendship with, whoever might have brought about the injustice, does it not include that they have to accept and admit their own shortcoming and their frailties before that kind of friendship can bring about human flourishing? So that's the second question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, colleagues. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to invite Professor Eze to, he's listened, he's been challenged, he's put concepts out. So I'm going to invite him to please take his time to respond, and then we will go towards wrapping up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I love the questions asked and the insightful observations these questions contain. Yeah, starting with Michael's observation, which is actually not a question, but I welcome the wonderful observation that, which implies that Nelson Mandela had to, we Africans living in a complicated world, we together with Nelson Mandela observe the disparity between ideals and reality. And you have to be extremely smart in dealing with a complicated world, and knowing full well that being cognizant of this disparity between ideals and reality. That's why negotiation, that's basically what negotiation implies. Negotiation is you come with a wonderful objective, but then reality brings you down brings you down to earth, basically. But you don't give up. So you don't give up your ideas. You keep negotiating, and step after step, knowing that deliberation and democracy is a long-term project. And I think that's what Mandela has realized. And as I said from in the beginning of my talk, Nelson Mandela was not perfect. He's not a saint, but what he gave us is a wonderful starting point for our long journey to, as paraphrasing him, a long journey to freedom, or to making Africa a better place. Yes, Agogo, I appreciate your comments, but if you understood me as perhaps castigating the poor, then that's not what I set out to do, and that's not what my presentation. But you rightly observed that I am of the conviction that the post-colonial answers that has been articulated, starting from Chielozona Eze's generation to the last 10 years, it has, as I said, it has its own merit, but it's no longer sufficient to meet the challenges of our time. And as Fanon would say, every generation must identify its problems or its challenges and must either meet it or betray it. So the challenge is for us for the present generation of intellectuals to see what's good in the older generation's approach. And I can't dismiss Robert Mugabe completely. And you seem to imply that that's making declarative and absolute statements. That's not part of me, and that's not implied in what I presented. So I acknowledge that Robert Mugabe and his generation, their approach had merits, but so if you look at, and of course, as I said, I don't dismiss the role of Western imperialism. I don't dismiss imperialism, but we cannot keep, shifting everything, most of our blames to Western imperialism. We know that they exist. Robert Mugabe was actually one of the, of course, he's a saint for many, but don't forget that he was one of, even before he became the villain of the West, he committed one of the first genocides in Africa against the Ndebele people. So we don't ignore that. So anyway, but his approach had its own merits. But then the question, what did it achieve for the people of Zimbabwe? So, and back to things fall apart. I know Evan Wangi, and I discussed with him, and the book he wrote, is also part of our discussions that we, the current generation, needs to rethink the approach. We need to perhaps take the best that the Achebe generation had to offer, but then we find a way of incorporating the rest of the world in order to meet the challenges of our generation. So that is why I said that the answers provided by Chinua Achebe and others, weren't, or they were enough for the time being. They were good or perfect for the time being, but they are no longer enough to meet the challenges of our time. Yes, things fall apart. Of course, I acknowledge things fall apart has almost exposed the cracks in African generation. My argument is that because of the need to meet the gaze of the West, most of us, the dominant response to that novel failed to explore the humanistic challenges, fails to explore the conditions of justice in that society. And of course, Achebe later on, so many years later, began to acknowledge that fact. I know that. So, but we have yet to explore the challenges of the political, the notion of justice in Igbo land, in Nigeria, in everything. So, and the answers given by Things Fall Apart are no longer enough. So friendship, as Abiodun said, friendship for me is a piece of the puzzle, is the beginning, right? So, and others have to, we set out with friendship as the first premise. And we, in the real world, we have to acknowledge that others might reject the hands of our friendship, but that's not a reason not to keep pushing the narrative of friendship. Others will disappoint us, but that's the world. So we cannot give up the notion of friendship because others will exploit it. Definitely, yes, that's true. And the others have to accept it. Definitely, as a political praxis, they will reject it. Yeah, we might start from the second premise that others will reject it, but that's what dialectic of political discourse means. Expressed in Hegelian sense, the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So I offer friendship, the other rejects it, and then we have to meet, and then how do we move forward? So that's basically my premise. Friendship is not if you like, the almighty formula, but it's a wonderful beginning.
Prof, I'm just reminded of translating that word friendship. So it's one of our practices here being students also of Abo ITC now, who keep forcing us to take the concepts into vernacular. That in Xhosa, friendship would kind of be translated as ubuhlobo. But when you talk about ubuhlobo, it has a very strong reciprocal meaning. And I just wonder if there's another way for you to build on that concept for us. I actually think it's a very important that ubuhlobo, how do you build ubuhlobo? How do you build that in a society like ours? I don't know if you have thoughts on that, if there's a different vernacular concept for the same word.
Well, I would say, I don't know. I think another way could be generosity of the spirit. Perhaps not just friendship, but goodwill, bringing goodwill to the world. And a person who brings goodwill to the world brings a gift, makes a gift, not to others, but to him or herself. So this person who brings generosity and goodwill accepts that he or she has dignity and wants to extend that dignity to others. So whether others accept it or not is not dependent on on your conviction that these others have inherent dignity. So whether we call it friendship or, as you said, ubotrob, or goodwill or generosity, it has to do with the way you see people. So what's the quality of your perception of other people? Is it inherently positive or negative? If it is inherently positive, that's for me and Mandela a wonderful way to begin. But even if others reject it, it will still work for you, because it's like seeing yourself in a mirror, right? So, and seeing yourself in a mirror, affirming what you see, and you never stop affirming it when you see others. As Martin Buber would frame it in another way, this I-thou relationship, I-you. It's going from the perspective that you don't see others as an it, but as you in their position. So that's, for me, what friendship is about, is having a positive attitude towards life. It's not, if you like, is believing or going from the conviction that you cannot do evil to others. So friendship might seem banal, but essential, it's believing that you don't want to do harm to any person. And so Mandela said that his greatest joy would be when Africa lives at peace with itself. Forget the West, if you like. So that's my concern. When I'm in Nigeria, my concern is, how do I treat people I see? And how do people who see me, how do they treat me? So because sometimes when we have the West at the back of our mind, it seems to disrupt our intersubjective relationship. And that's my concern. My concern is, how do we treat one another? And if we don't begin from this premise of I-thou, or friendship, or goodwill, or recognizing the humanity, as I said, if we don't recognize the humanity of others, we cannot deliberate. And deliberation, as Ochikakita would say, begins on the premise that the person you are deliberating with is a human being, and he or she has the same value, is equal to you. That's everything. That's all this philosophy is what the concept friendship expresses.
No, thank you so much. I just, sorry, I saw there were more comments, but it is time to wrap up. I did say I would keep my eye on the time. So I'm sorry about that, Dr. Khumalo. It's not because I don't value your insights. I just did want to give a moment to Professor Kearney. I saw him, he was able to join us, just to say hello, and he will catch up with the video later.
Hey, Prof, thanks so much. It's been amazing. I got the last part of it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really, really grateful for sharing your thoughts.
Right.
And your cognitive skills, thought processes with us on such an important matter. And thanks to the colleagues and everybody, of course, attending as well. So we'll touch base again. Thanks. Thank you
I
so
think
much.
this, yeah, thank you. I think there's a lot for people to challenge and continue thinking about here, which is why does the oppressed, there are these comments, they always have to extend the hand and have their whole arm dragged along. So that question, Professor, I think we need to continue with that. I don't know how. I think we have to continue our friendship with you because, you know, we are Africans, and so we don't always take this. We don't always want to take this sort of structural German approach to society. We also want to take an analysis of community and society. And so the question is, at what point do we keep giving our hand and have our arm dragged with it? You know, why the oppressed always have to extend the hand? But I also picked, I think you made a very powerful comment, which was that Mandela's extending of his hand is not dependent on the other person's recognition of him because he recognizes himself anyway. And I think that agency is a difficult one for Africans to negotiate. So I just want you to be able to say goodbye to everybody, say thank you, or just extend your whatever it is you want to say. I'm giving you one last word. To you, Prof. Yeah, yes, because we are leaving now. You can say.
Okay, yeah. Well, as you rightly put it, the conversation continues, and I thank every one of you who made comments, who disagree with some of my ideas, and I'll keep thinking about it, and we keep the discussion, and we'll keep reaching out our hands because we reach our hands to ourselves. Basically, whether we are dragged to the dust or not, so it's not dependent on others, but we reach our hands to the world, knowing that we are basically changing the operative modality of the world. So and what South Africa has given is being practiced in Canada, in other parts of the world, and Canada is now involved in truth and reconciliation, and this is because, and America is also about to do it. This is because we have realized that the Western model of the world no longer works. So we depend on South Africa for this new impetus. Thank you.
Oh, that's, I hope this university takes that very seriously, by the way. We take it very seriously, that burden, as every African country has its own. Tanzania has its burden, Ghana has its burden, Nigeria has its burden, South Africa has a burden, which we must carry. Thank you so much, everybody. Jenny, this spotlight, I feel like I can't see everyone, but thank you to everybody. Thank you to Prof. Kiat. Thank you to Dr. Mutinda Nzioki, the director of the Center for Philosophy in Africa. Thank you to Jenny, to Anele, to Andre, and everybody who was here today. Thank you very much to the Mengiti family and the Emengini Institute, our friends in the Black Atlantic. So thank you all, and thank you to everyone who has participated. Please note, we're trying to build a community here. So Anele keeps a database of names, I believe, so that we can constantly be just trying to build this community through this university and its burden to carry the name of Mandela. Not a burden, but a privilege. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, everybody. Bye.